Okay, here we go. This is four voice, and this is some warm up, and it will be at 200 the first time, and then we may tell you what. Let's do this in 14s. Okay, so this will be 210. Oh, excuse me. And I am the witness.
I am Mr. Swanson for the plaintiff.
I am attorney for, I'm actually defense attorney, Mr. Wesley.
I am the court.
Okay, we're going to read it in 14s. It'll be 210, and that's really yeah. And we're going to start with the question by Swanson on the record.
Okay, here we go. At some point in time, did you understand that Mr. Storrs had made an offer to purchase the Scoops Creamery and Grill business?
Yes.
Did you actively participate in the negotiations for the sale of the Scoops business to Mr. Storrs?
No.
Why not?
Because I was bedridden at that particular point. I wasn't able to go to my chiropractic office to operate as chiropractor. I wasn't able to go to the creamery. The doctor told me to stay in bed, which I had to do because of the way I was. I was deathly ill at that time.
Who, if you know, handled the negotiations with Mr. Storrs for the sale of the business?
My father and my wife.
Did you retain an attorney to represent you in the transaction for the sale of the business to Mr. Storrs?
Mr. Walter Dahl.
Did you give Mr. Dahl any instructions as to how he should perform his legal services for you in relation to the disposition that you wanted him to make or wanted him to arrange to be made of the lease obligation on the premises?
I'm sorry, Your Honor, the question's ambiguous with respect to you. I think there is the mention that the negotiations were conducted by Mr. James Popjoy and his wife, and now he was asking you.
Well, clarify it in your answer. It was other than you. Personally, you gave such instructions.
All right, again, Mr. Walter Dahl was acquired by myself, my father, and my wife on the recommendation of, I believe it was Vance Van Dissel, who is a personal friend.
What did you three tell Mr. Van Tassel about what you wanted done with the obligation for the lease in the course of the sale transaction?
Well, the one possibly 2 times that I saw Mr. Dahl and I was able to struggle out of bed in order to go see him, I told him we wanted out of the business totally, the business and the lease. We wanted nothing at all to do with the property. We wanted out of it cleanly.
Did you tell Mr. Dahl that you wanted the buyer to become the primary obligor for the lease?
Objection, Your Honor, leading.
He's an adverse party.
Your Honor, I think it's clear in the courtroom who represents who.
I have that in mind, Mr. Wesley. In the first, this isn't obviously leading. Not every question that calls for a yes or no answer is leading.
Well, it says primary obligors. That's something this witness would use. I don't think so.
Find out on cross if he really knows what he's talking about, but it's permissible to ask him the question.
Primary obligor is something I wouldn't use. I used it in my deposition. When I contacted Mr. Dahl, I personally let Mr. Dahl know that I wanted Mr. Storrs to assume the liability on the lease. At that point, the first meeting, I may not have said primary obligor, but I did make it very clear to Mr. Dahl that we wanted off of the lease totally and wanted nothing to do with it. We wanted Mr. Storrs to be responsible for the lease.
Did you also give Mr. Dahl any instructions regarding the lease for the computer cash register system?
Yes, I did.
What were those instructions?
Same instructions, basically, as I had given Mr. Dahl about the lease on the building. I wanted out of that completely without any obligations or any strings attached.
Did Mr. Dahl ever tell you that it was going to be impossible to make Mr. Storrs a primary obligor of the lease?
Objection.
What's the objection?
I object, Your Honor. Again, it's leading and suggestive.
Overruled.
Did you answer the question, Mr. Popejoy?
I said no, he didn't.
Mr. Popejoy, other than being
In part of my ruling, for your understanding, Mr. Wesley, I'm not going to indulge in, this man sat here and listened to Dahl testify here yesterday, so we all know the subject matter is not a great deal of surprise to anybody. It's to make the suggestiveness of the question likely to elicit perjury. So I am just going to rule. Go ahead.
Mr. Popejoy, other than those instructions you gave to Mr. Dahl and the execution of these agreements, which we have just gone through, do you have any other recollection of participating in any way in the process of the sale of the business to Mr. Storrs?
No.
Well, that discussion of the preceding question, I'm not sure I got the answer. Did Dahl ever tell you it would be impossible to get off the lease? Is that your question?
Did Mr. Dahl ever tell you that he wasn't able to make Mr. Storrs a primary obligor?
unable to? And your answer to that was?
No.
I think the question was impossible, Your Honor, the word impossible used. You are correct, but with that exception, I would agree.
Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Popejoy, have you made any rent payments on the premises lease for 7910 Antelope Road, Building D? I believe it is after August of 1987.
No, I have not.
Mr. Popejoy, at some point in time after the close of escrow on the sale of the business to Mr. Storrs, did you ever have occasion to go and visit Mr. Storrs in a face-to-face meeting?
After we closed the business
After you closed escrow?
and sold to Mr. Storrs?
After you closed escrow?
Yes, I did.
And how many times did you meet with Mr. Storrs?
2, maybe 3 times.
What did you and Mr. Storrs discuss at those meetings?
I'm not sure of all we discussed. However, I am very clear on the fact that I went there basically to find out why Topa Thrift and Loan, which dealt with the computer lease, was calling me to make payments for the computer lease, as well as why he had not sent in the transfer of the lease obligation as the agreement was testified.
When you say transfer of lease obligation, you are referring to the TOPA lease?
The Topa lease on the computer registers, that's correct.
Let me show you what's been marked as Exhibit N. Do you recognize that document that's marked as Exhibit N?
As best I can recognize it, I recognize the name Topa Thrift and Loan at the top and my signature at the bottom, so I am assuming it is the lease contract on the computers.
Is that your signature that appears on the bottom of page 1?
Yes, it is.
What reply did Mr. Storrs make to you when you requested that those things be done in relation to the TOPA one?
On which visit?
Well, the first one.
Okay, on the first visit, he said that it had been overlooked by him and that they intended to get the lease transferred into their name or into his name, and he would get that sent in immediately. And he was unaware that they were late for the payment, and that would be sent in immediately as well. And so we left with the understanding that he...
Your Honor, this is not responsive at this point.
Stop right there. The question is, what did he tell you?
In the course of this conversation, did Mr. Storrs indicate to you at any time that it had been a corporation or limited partnership that would be momentarily sending these papers to Mr. Topa?
He said nothing about a limited partnership. His indication to me was that
Your Honor, that is now non-responsive.
Overruled.
Go ahead.
he indicated to me,
I assume what he's saying here, he isn't going to paraphrase it. He doesn't have the exact language.
he stated, I will get this taken care of immediately, was maybe as best I could paraphrase, but he said he would
Where were you when you had this meeting, by the way?
in his office.
What firm?
Storrs Realty Company on Fair Oaks Boulevard, Carmichael.
Did Mr. Storrs ever take up an office in the Scoops Creamery and Grill building to your knowledge?
Not to my knowledge. Okay, we're gonna go back and do this again, and we don't do this too often in this class. We're gonna do 1-minute segments in 14ths. So we'll read a minute, we stop and pause. Okay, so when we get to the number 1, we're gonna pause there. You can finish that sentence, and then we'll pick it up and keep on going that way. Okay, here we go.
Okay, here we go for the record. At some point in time, did you understand that Mr. Storrs had made an offer to purchase the Scoops Creamery and Grill business?
Yes.
Did you actively participate in the negotiations for the sale of the Scoops business to Mr. Storrs?
No.
Why not?
Because I was bedridden at that particular point, I wasn't able to go to my chiropractic office to operate as chiropractor. I wasn't able to go to the creamery. The doctor told me to stay in bed, which I had to do because of the way I was. I was deathly ill at that time.
Who of you know handled the negotiations with Mr. Storrs for the sale of the business?
My father and my wife.
Did you retain an attorney to represent you in the transaction for the sale of the business to Mr. Storrs?
Mr. Walter Dahl.
Did you give Mr. Dahl any instructions as to how he should perform his legal services for you in relation to the disposition that you wanted him to make or wanted him to arrange to be made of the lease obligation on the premises?
I'm sorry, Your Honor, the question's ambiguous with respect to you. I think there is a mention that the negotiations were conducted by Mr. James Popejoy and wife, and now he is asking you.
Okay. So obviously what we're hoping you're doing is trying to hold on as long as you can when we do these. And then we get a chance to catch up. Okay, begins with the court, line 2, 14th.
For the record. Well, clarify it in your answer. It was other than you personally gave such instructions?
All right, again, Mr. Walter Dahl was acquired by myself, my father, and my wife on the recommendation of, I believe it was Vance Van Tassel, who is a personal friend.
What did you three tell Mr. Van Tassel about what you wanted done with the obligation for the lease in the course of the sale transaction?
Well, the one, possibly 2 times that I saw Mr. Dahl and I was able to struggle out of bed in order to go see him, I told him we wanted out of the business totally, the business and the lease. We wanted nothing at all to do with the property. We wanted out of it cleanly.
Did you tell Mr. Dahl that you wanted the buyer to become the primary obligor for the lease?
Objection, Your Honor, leading.
He's an adverse party.
Your Honor, I think it's clear in this courtroom who represents who.
I have that in mind, Mr. Wesley. In the first, this is obviously leading. Not every question that calls for a yes or no answer is leading.
Well, it says,
Stop. Okay, Mr. Wesley?
okay. Well, it says primary obligors. That's something this witness would use. I don't think so.
Find out on cross if he really knows what he's talking about, but it's permissible to ask the question.
Primary obligor is something I wouldn't use. I used it in my deposition. When I contacted Mr. Dahl, I personally let Mr. Dahl know that I wanted Mr. Storrs to assume the liability on the lease. At that point, the first meeting, I may not have said primary obligor, but I did make it very clear to Mr. Dahl that we wanted off of the lease totally and wanted nothing to do with it. We wanted Mr. Storrs to be responsible for the lease.
Did you also give Mr. Dahl any instructions regarding the lease for the computer cash register system?
Yes, I did.
What were those instructions?
Same instructions basically as I had given Mr. Dahl about the lease on the building. I wanted out of that completely without any obligations or any strings attached.
Did Mr. Dahl ever tell you that it was going to be impossible to make Mr. Storrs a primary obligor of the lease?
Objection.
What's the objection?
I object, Your Honor.
Okay, Mr. Wesley, once again, line 26.
Again, it's leading, suggestive.
Overruled.
Did you answer the question, Mr. Popejoy?
I said no, he didn't.
Mr. Popejoy, other than being
In part of my ruling for your understanding, Mr. Wesley, I'm not going to indulge in, this man sat here and listened to Dahl testify here yesterday, so we all know the subject matter is not a great deal of surprise to anybody. It's to make the suggestiveness of the question likely to elicit perjury, so I am just going to rule. Go ahead.
Mr. Popejoy, other than those instructions you gave to Mr. Dahl and the execution of these agreements which we have just gone through, do you have any other recollection of participating in any way in the process of the sale of the business to Mr. Storrs?
No.
Well, that discussion of the preceding question, I'm not sure I got the answer. Did Dahl ever tell you it would be impossible to get off the lease? Is that your question?
Did Mr. Dahl ever tell you that he was unable to make Mr. Storrs the primary obligor?
Unable to, and your answer to that was?
No.
I think the question was impossible.
Okay, another one, Mr. Wesley. You can start over on line 1.
Okay. I think the question was impossible, Your Honor, the word impossible used. You are correct, but with that exception, I would agree.
Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Popejoy, have you made any rent payments on the premises lease for 7910 Antelope Road, Building D, I believe it is, after August of 1987?
No, I have not.
Mr. Popejoy, at some point in time after the close of escrow on the sale of the business to Mr. Storrs, did you ever have occasion to go and visit Mr. Storrs in a face-to-face meeting?
After we closed the business
After you close escrow?
and sold to Mr. Storrs?
After you close escrow?
Yes, I did.
And how many times did you meet with Mr. Storrs?
2, maybe 3 times.
What did you and Mr. Storrs discuss at those meetings?
I'm not sure of all we discussed. However, I'm very clear on the fact that I went there basically to find out why Topa Thrift and Loan, which dealt with the computer lease, was calling me to make payments for the computer lease, as well as why he had not sent in the transfer of lease obligation as the agreement has testified. Okay, line 2, we'll start there.
Okay, for the record. When you say a transfer of lease obligation, you are referring to the TOPA lease?
The Topa lease on the computers, computer registers, that's correct.
Let me show you what's been marked as Exhibit N. Do you recognize that document that's marked as Exhibit N?
As best I can recognize it, I recognize the name Topa Thrift and Loan at the top and my signature at the bottom. So I am assuming it is the lease contract on the computers.
Is that your signature that appears on the bottom of page 1?
Yes, it is.
What reply did Mr. Storrs make to you when you requested that these things be done in relation to the TOPA one?
On which visit?
Well, the first one.
Okay, on the first visit, he said that it had been overlooked by him and that they intended to get the lease transferred into their name or into his name, and he would get that sent in immediately, and he was unaware that they were late for the payment and that it would be sent in immediately as well. And so we left with the understanding. Okay, this is the last one. This will be about a minute and a half. Mr. Wesley.
Your Honor, this is non-responsive at this point.
Stop right there. The question is, what did he tell you?
In the course of this conversation, did Mr. Storrs indicate to you at any time that it had been a corporation or limited partnership that would be momentarily sending these papers to Mr. Topa?
He said nothing about a limited partnership. His indication to me was that
Your Honor, that is now non-responsive.
Overruled.
Go ahead.
he indicated to me,
I assume what he's saying here, he isn't going to paraphrase it. He doesn't have the exact language.
he stated, I will get this taken care of immediately, was maybe the best I could paraphrase, but he said he would
Where were you when you had this meeting, by the way?
in his office.
What firm?
Storrs Realty Company on Fair Oaks Boulevard, Carmichael.
Did Mr. Storrs ever take up an office in the Scoops Creamery and Grill Building to your knowledge?
Not to my knowledge. Okay, that one's done. Now, we're just gonna do 5 minutes more of this, which we did the other day. It's about the PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs, and we're talking about molecules and metabolites, all sorts of fun stuff.
Oh, you and I are sharing.
Well, we can share too.
Oh, I thought,
Yeah, no, that's fine, whatever works.
It's easier.
that's okay.
Okay, stretch your neck. It's never used to bother me now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like it.
Okay, page 13, and let's start on, in the middle of a witness's answer, line 11, and let's identify, I am the witness.
I am Mr. Costello for the plaintiff.
Am I?
You are, actually, there's no court, there's a defense
No, I'm
too.
defense, regular defense.
Yeah, you're Mr. Gibbs,
Some Gibbs, okay.
and Judy, you are Mr. Mosseri.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, and we're gonna read this in, ooh, this is counter for 210. I guess I didn't know that the other day. Read it in 16s. Okay, line 11 on the record. And the rest of that paragraph is that at least in some species or something of that sort, these electrophiles seem to be able to actually get to the cell. They bind with these big molecules, macromolecules in the cell. So at least it's plausible that because of the nature of PCBs and their metabolites that they could cause cancer. Oh, I'm sorry. This is, who's questioning? So sorry. It is Mr. Costello. Okay, here we go with the question.
Okay, here we go. Doctor, in review of your literature, do you agree that PCBs are a fairly unstable chemical and stay in the body for some time?
They're fairly stable.
Fairly stable?
That's right.
Now, secondly, you said PCBs are eliminated from the body at a very slow rate, allowing the chronic exposure often needed for carcinogenesis. This is because it's a stable type of compound.
That's right. It doesn't degrade very rapidly.
Were there studies that were furnished to you that would so indicate?
I don't believe so. It's hard for me to remember if that particular piece of information and the previous one came from the material that was given to me. More likely, it came from the material I pursued on my own.
Before I get farther, what material did you pursue on your own?
Particularly helpful was an article in something called The Origins of Human Cancer. It's a 3-volume set. Cold Spring Harbor Symposium, which I participated in the symposium, and I have these volumes in my office, and there was one chapter on polychlorinated biphenyls.
Would you say that again?
I'm sorry, Cold Spring Harbor Symposium. That particular article particularly dealt with these aspects of sort of the nature of PCBs, less in respect to their potential to cause cancer, just evidence of that, but more for their chemical properties, which I hadn't known too well up to that point.
And you gave as a third reason suggesting that polychlorinated biphenyls could be carcinogenic in man. Hepatocellular carcinoma has developed in rodents exposed to PCBs. Do you remember what studies you gleaned that information from?
Those are in the packet.
Hepatocellular carcinoma, could you give us a definition of that?
Cancer of the liver.
I didn't hear that. Cancer of what?
Liver.
And as of what reason, a study of PCB exposed workers found an increased coincidence of melanoma and pancreatic cancer increased largely confined to a group of workers with high exposure. What's melanoma?
That's a type of skin cancer.
And pancreatic cancer, I take it, that's cancer of the pancreas?
Right.
Where's the pancreas located?
It's one of the digestive organs in the abdomen.
Is that the lower part of the abdomen?
Well, the pancreatic duct leads into the beginning of the intestines, basically just below the stomach.
Is the type of cancer melanoma and pancreatic cancer, is that the same cellular type of cancer?
Not at all.
Different type?
Completely different.
Could you tell us what type of cells they?
Sure, melanoma is a cancer of a pigment cell in the skin. This pigment cell can exist other places, such as in the eyes, but primarily it's located in the skin. The pancreas is more of a glandular tissue. It's a gland that makes 3 digestive enzymes.
And the hepatocellular carcinoma, what?
That's another different type altogether. Liver cells are just different from all these others. They have their own function.
Then there is some evidence that polychlorinated biphenyls could be carcinogenic in at least 3 these areas of man.
What areas? I object to that.
The 3 that we just mentioned.
Well, if you're willing to indicate both lower animals and humans altogether, yes. In lower animals, hepatocellular carcinoma. In people based on this one small study, the pancreatic and the melanoma, certainly there's some suggestive evidence there, just as there's evidence for the ones that aren't.
Okay, in addition to those studies, you also evidently reviewed the information on the you show exposure, you show Japan exposure.
Yes.
There, doctor, I take it you noted, I believe, that half the deaths that happened occurred in that city had been from cancer.
Actually, I didn't note that. I'd have to check it out, but
Okay, well, I think
there were a total of 9 cancer deaths, and
I think there were 22 deaths, and 3 of them were accidental, and of the natural deaths, half of them were of cancer.
mhm.
Would you consider that a fairly high incidence of cancer?
No, well, you couldn't really comment on that unless you knew the age and sex composition of the group that was exposed.
What percentage of the population, if you know, what percentage of the Japanese population that died non-accidental deaths would you expect to die of cancer?
I'm just not familiar with that. Again, it depends on the age group. If you took all cancer combined, it's probably not more than 15%. But if you take several age groups, it could be quite a bit higher.
Doctor, I take it you're not denying the fact that there certainly could be a relationship between exposure of polychlorinated biphenyls and cancer in humans?
What type of cancer are you talking about?
Well, this is a general question.
Just based on those first couple points, I would certainly agree there could very well be a relationship because of what we know about PCBs. I would say that there's an area that deserves high priority to determine whether or not they could, because they have the kind of properties that make you very worried about them.
Doctor, have you done any research work in cancer related to asbestos or exposure to asbestos?
Nothing, not seriously. Why don't we just say no?
All right, doctor, do you treat cancer patients?
No,
Do you perform surgery?
no,
Do you have patients as such?
no.
And I think that you mentioned that you really only had experience in one occupational exposure of suspected cancer.
Only one research experience, right? Okay. That's all of that for today. We'll save some for another day. I bet you are.
She's looking forward to it.
Yeah, she said she's really glad she didn't miss this. Someday you will take an asbestos case. Oh, but I wanted to ask, how many of you, as soon as we said hepato, how many of you were thinking, oh, liver? Yeah?
Candy is, I'm sure.
No, she's going,
Oh, really? She should be studying us.
what does that mean? Did you get it, Candy? No? Hepato, it's liver. Hepat, or H-A-P, H-E-P-A, or H-E-P-A-T-O. She said, I thought you were talking another language.
That is another language.
Yeah, medical language. Okay. Gosh, you know what? We just got bunch of transcripts from Angela Sinclair we're starting to use for requirements that are asbestos. Sounds like fun, huh? I should get some of them in here. Big money in those cases. It'd be worth learning briefs and such for. Okay. This has 4 minutes of warm up, which we will do. This should be easy peasy right about now, I would think. And we have back to report. So we have Mr. McKinsey for the plaintiff, Mr. Corin for defense, and we have warm up from page 3 until it tells us to stop. 4.5 minutes, so, or just 4 minutes, I guess, sorry. So page 8 is where we're gonna stop and warm up. I am the witness.
I am Mr. McKenzie for the plaintiff.
I am Mr. Corn for defense.
And I am the court.
We might do this twice. Okay, here we go.
Listen.
Let's do this in, 15's the first time.
It's the court for the record. Okay, People versus Charles John Rizzo. People ready?
People are ready, Your Honor.
Okay, Mr. Corin, is this your client?
Yes, Mr. Rizzo is present in court this morning. We're ready to proceed, Your Honor.
Call your first witness, please.
Your Honor, I'd ask there be an exclusion of witnesses before the first witness is called.
Okay, you don't have any problems with that, I take it?
I do not, Your Honor. I'd ask that Deputy Andre be appointed my investigating officer.
Okay, that would be fine. Anyone else going to be testifying in this case? Okay, proceed, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. People call Deputy Andre. Good morning. Would you please state your full name, spelling your last for the record?
Yvette Monique Andre, A-N-D-R-E.
What's your occupation and assignment?
Deputy Sheriff for Stanislaus Sheriff's Office.
How long have you been a sworn peace officer?
I've been a sworn peace officer for 9 years, 5 with the city of Newman and 4 with the Stanislaus County Sheriff's Office.
Were you on duty on May 14 of this year at around 12:50 in the morning?
Yes.
Did anything unusual happen at that time?
While I was on patrol in the Salida area, I was on Kiernan Avenue, the 99 overcross at the Salida exit. I saw a black vehicle take the exit and turn eastbound onto Kiernan Avenue. The vehicle pulled to the shoulder of the roadway and came to a complete stop. As I went, continuing past the vehicle, which was on my right, I saw the occupants of the vehicle exit in trade positions. As I passed the vehicle and made a U-turn.
I'm going to object, Your Honor. I think the officer has given a narrative as far as her response, and the answer so far is non-responsive. The deputy district attorney asked her if something unusual happened, and so far we haven't heard anything unusual. So that would be my objection for the record.
Why don't you go ahead and ask another question, Mr. McKenzie?
Thank you. You stated you saw 2 individuals switching positions. Can you describe that for us, please?
When the vehicle came to a stop on the shoulder of the roadway, I saw the driver and the passenger exit the vehicle and trade positions inside the vehicle. They both sat in different seats.
The driver went to the passenger seat, passenger to driver seat, is that correct?
Yes,
And how far were you from the vehicle when you observed this?
I was 10, 15 feet from the vehicle.
What happened after that?
The vehicle made a U-turn to re-enter the highway, and when it made the U-turn, the passenger door opened and was closed real quickly.
What did you observe after that?
The vehicle began to accelerate, pulled in behind the vehicle, and clocked it at a pace of approximately 90 miles an hour and made a traffic stop.
Made a traffic stop. The point where you first saw the vehicle, was that in the county of Stanislaus?
Yes,
And the point where you stopped the vehicle, was that also in Stanislaus County?
yes.
What happened after you made the vehicle stop?
I approached the vehicle and spoke with both occupants and identified both occupants and saw objective symptoms of alcohol intoxication and requested California Highway Patrol respond.
All right, as you sit here today, do you see the person that you saw driving the vehicle first before the switch in court today?
Yes.
Would you please point to that individual and describe what they're wearing?
Subject's wearing what looks like black jeans and a blue shirt.
The defendant for the record, Your Honor.
Yes, the record reflects the witness has identified the defendant.
When you stopped the vehicle, which seat was the defendant in?
Passenger seat.
Did you notice anything about the clothing worn by the individuals at the time of the stop or at the time of the switch?
Yes, both. They both had on blue shirts. One was lighter and the other was a darker blue color.
Do you recall which had on which?
The defendant had on a lighter blue shirt.
Officer, are you reading from something?
I was looking at my notes, yes.
Okay, Your Honor, that is completely improper. I'd ask that the last portion of her testimony be stricken and that the notes presently in front of her be identified and who made those notations.
Okay, counsel, you want to do that?
The notes that are in front of you, who made those notes?
I made those notes this morning from my report that you have in front of you. I'm sorry I didn't state that I was referring to my notes.
I'd also like an opportunity to read those notes.
Okay. Mr. Corrin, would you like to read the notes at this time?
I would, Your Honor.
Okay,
May I approach the witness?
you may.
May I sit down and look at them, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
When I get to cross-examine the officer, I would be asking at that time that those be marked as defense exhibits. So I'd request that the officer leave them right there where she's sitting, please.
Okay, that's fine. Proceed.
Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna do it one more time. Let's do it in 14 this time. Oh, that's what it's. Oh, I got it. Okay, so that time mark at the bottom of page 3 is actually where that begins the minute marks. Actually, you didn't notice that, but whatever. I was all confused. Okay. 14 this time, same material.
It's the court for the record. Okay, People versus Charles John Rizzo. People ready?
People are ready, Your Honor.
Okay, Mr. Corrin, is this your client?
Yes, Mr. Rizzo is present in court this morning. We're ready to proceed, Your Honor.
Call your first witness, please.
Your Honor, I'd ask there be an exclusion of witnesses before the first witness is called.
Okay, you don't have any problems with that, I take it?
I do not, Your Honor. I'd ask that Deputy Andre be appointed my investigating officer.
Okay, that will be fine. Anyone else going to be testifying in this case? Okay, proceed, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. People call Deputy Andre. Good morning. Would you please state your full name, spell in your last for the record?
Yvette Monique Andre, Andre.
What's your occupation and assignment?
Deputy Sheriff for Stanislaus Sheriff's Office.
How long have you been a sworn peace officer?
I've been a sworn peace officer for 9 years, 5 with the City of Newman and 4 with the Stanislaus County Sheriff's Office.
Were you on duty on May 14 of this year at around 12:50 in the morning?
Yes.
Did anything unusual happen at that time?
While I was on patrol in the Salida area, I was on Kiernan Avenue, the 99 overcross at the Salida exit. I saw a black vehicle take the exit and turn eastbound onto Kiernan Avenue. The vehicle pulled to the shoulder of the roadway and came to a complete stop. As I was continuing past the vehicle, which was on my right, I saw the occupants of the vehicle exit and trade positions. As I passed the vehicle and made a U-turn.
I'm going to object, Your Honor. I think the officer has given a narrative as far as her response, and the answer so far is non-responsive. The Deputy District Attorney asked her if something unusual happened, and so far we haven't heard anything unusual. So that would be my objection for the record.
Why don't you go ahead and ask another question, Mr. McKenzie?
Thank you. You stated you saw 2 individuals switching positions. Can you describe that for us, please?
When the vehicle came to a stop on the shoulder of the roadway, I saw the driver and the passenger exit the vehicle and trade positions inside the vehicle. They both sat in different seats.
The driver went to the passenger seat, passenger to driver's seat, is that correct?
Yes,
And how far were you from the vehicle when you observed this?
I was 10, 15 feet from the vehicle.
What happened after that?
The vehicle made a U-turn to re-enter the highway, and when it made the U-turn, the passenger door opened and closed real quickly.
What did you observe after that?
The vehicle began to accelerate. I pulled in behind the vehicle and clocked it at a pace of approximately 90 miles an hour and made a traffic stop.
Made a traffic stop. The point where you first saw the vehicle, was that in the county of Stanislaus?
Yes,
And the point where you stopped the vehicle, was that also in Stanislaus County?
yes.
What happened after you made the vehicle stop?
I approached the vehicle and spoke with both occupants, and I identified both occupants and saw objective symptoms of alcohol intoxication and requested California Highway Patrol respond.
All right, as you sit here today, do you see the person that you saw driving the vehicle first before the switch in court today?
Yes,
Would you please point to that individual and describe what they're wearing?
subject's wearing what looks like black jeans and a blue shirt.
The defendant for the record, Your Honor.
Yes, the record reflects the witness has identified the defendant.
When you stopped the vehicle, which seat was the defendant in?
Passenger seat.
Did you notice anything about the clothing worn by the individuals at the time of the stop or at the time of the switch?
Yes, they both had on blue shirts. One was lighter and the other was a darker blue color.
Do you recall which had on which?
The defendant had on a lighter blue shirt.
What? Officer, are you reading from something?
I was looking at my notes, yes.
Okay, Your Honor, that is completely improper. I'd ask that the last portion of her testimony be stricken and that the notes presently in front of her be identified and who made those notations.
Okay, counsel, you want to do that?
The notes that are in front of you, who made those notes?
I made those notes this morning from my report that you have in front of you. I'm sorry, I didn't state that I was referring to my notes.
I'd also like an opportunity to read those notes.
Okay, Mr. Corn, would you like to read the notes at this time?
I would, Your Honor.
Okay,
May I approach the witness?
you may.
May I sit down and look at them, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
When I get to cross-examine the officer, I would be asking at that time that those be marked as defense exhibits. So I'd request that the officer leave them right there where she's sitting, please.
Okay, that's fine. Proceed.
Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna now do a 1200.
1,200? We're awake.
And it starts on page 8, line 13. I'm gonna stop this recording and restart because I taped the tapes yesterday or Monday, Monday, and I don't wanna do that. So, here we go.